Welcome to the Afghanistan Project Podcast. I'm your host, Beth Bailey, and today my guest is Julie Pacheco-Toye, the foster mother of Kara, a young Afghan teen who came to the U.S. unaccompanied following the withdrawal and went through a great deal of uncertainty before finding herself in Julie and her husband's home. Now, Kara experiences even greater uncertainty as President Donald Trump's executive order suspending the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program and possible impending Afghanistan travel ban may put an even longer than anticipated pause on her reunion with her family. In addition to being a foster mom to Kara, Julie is a woman of many passions, including flamenco dance, travel writing, and photography. She was also a longtime Spanish teacher and now is a mentor and instructional coach for other teachers and a designer of professional development courses. Julie, you are seriously a woman of a lot of amazing things. It's really a pleasure to have you here, and I think we're going to hit some very emotionally raw things tonight, just knowing what I know about both of us. So thanks for agreeing to dive in with me today.
Thank you.
Well, I'd love to start with asking you what, if any, connection you had to Afghanistan prior to getting to know Kara.
None. I had no connection whatsoever to Afghanistan before that. I do have a vivid memory of the first time the Taliban were in control, reading an article and being completely horrified. That really stuck with me over the years. And so when she came into our lives, it came right back to me.
Oh my gosh. I can imagine. Yeah. And that now you've got somebody who has to flee the new Taliban. So you understand. I mean, yeah, I don't think you could survive that time and not be aware of what the Taliban were doing. But now it feels like people are pretty unaware that it's going on. It's a very strange time. Well, what did you know about Kara's transition to the U.S. when you and your husband agreed to bring her in and give her a home with you?
We had been told by her social worker at school, who was the one who contacted me, letting me know that there was this young woman who needed a safe place to stay, and could she come stay with us until they figured something out. She basically let me know that Kara was an unaccompanied minor evacuee from August of 2021, and that she had very little English, and that she had been in some very unstable situations up until then. And that was really all I knew.
Wow. And there's a lot more to her story than that. I mean, that's a very understated treatment. And so what was your reaction when you heard that? Did you
well, we said absolutely, she can come stay with us. We have a room, we have plenty of space. The reason the social worker came to me was because she knew that we had hosted a lot of people from age 12 up to middle age from various countries just as guests to our home. And the previous school year, we had taken in a young woman from Italy who was an exchange student who had had some rough experiences with her host families. So we had taken her in for the last 6 weeks or so of the school year. So when Kara was in a very bad situation and needed a place to stay, I was the person she thought of.
Wow. What was the transition like? Because obviously it had been a rough experience for her before that. So how was it for you and your husband, and how was it for her in those early days?
You know, I just spoke with her about that this afternoon when I was thinking about this interview. And she told me she remembers that she was very, very happy that first day. She was coming from a pretty bad situation for the couple of weeks right before she came to our house. She was in a pretty bad situation. And the living situations that she was in prior to that, since being in the U.S., were also very difficult for her. So she said she was very happy as soon as she came into our house. She remembered that we had told her she could call us by our first names, or she could call us mom and dad, or if there was something else she wanted to call us, she could, and she immediately said mom and dad.
Oh, that's so lovely.
Yeah.
seemed like, there's a really beautiful article that was written about your situation and Kara's situation, and it seems like it wasn't long after she came to be with you that you learned a lot more about what she had gone through. And I would love it if you could detail that, because I could not believe it when I read it myself.
Yeah. So her whole family had gone to the airport in Kabul, like so many people in Afghanistan, and especially in Kabul did, during those days immediately during and after the withdrawal, trying to get onto an evacuation flight. And at the airport, it was so chaotic. We've all seen the videos. The family became separated, and they had agreed that if they became separated, everybody should still try to get on a flight if they could, and they would reconnect later. And she was the only one who made it onto a flight. That experience in itself was very, very difficult for her. She saw a little girl trampled to death during that. The evacuation flights were on these big carriers. It wasn't, a commercial jet, and she'd never been on a plane at all before. So it was very scary for her. But she wasn't alone. There were several other unaccompanied minors on the same flight that went to Qatar then. And then I don't know how much detail you want me to go into at this point.
As much as you like, please.
Okay. So she was in a camp for unaccompanied minors from Afghanistan in Qatar for about 3 months. She said there were around 300 children in this camp. Some of them were reunited with family pretty quickly. Some of them were sent to other countries around the world where they had other family members. And some of them who were still waiting after that time ended up being sent to the United States. Her situation became more complicated because her ID, like almost everyone over the age of 5 in Afghanistan, her ID did not have her accurate date of birth on it. She knew her date of birth. She knew exactly how old she was. But her Tazkara, her Afghan ID, indicated that she was 19 at the time, when in reality she had just turned 15 before the evacuations. So she was processed as an adult in the United States, not as a minor. That was problematic for many reasons. One reason, the worst of it was that she did not get the UAM designation, the unaccompanied Afghan minor designation, which you can only get upon arrival. Even after the government recognized her correct date of birth, after a lot of work by a lot of people, she still couldn't get the UAM designation.
Can I tell, what would that have done? Tell me about why that was important for her.
Because those kids, the kids that entered with a UAM designation, their P3 cases were opened almost immediately for their families to be relocated.
Okay.
And reunited with them in the U.S.
Sure.
She was not able to, although her immigration lawyer did try to open a P3 case and did work on that quite extensively, there wasn't an actual route for her to be considered a P3 until it was September of 23, I believe, when the State Department opened the DS 4317 to kids like her. She wasn't the only one. Kids like her who had entered as minors but without the UAM designation. So her real, official case through the DS 4317 was really only begun in September of 23, despite that there were a lot of efforts previous to that to get her family here.
And that's so sad. I actually was trying to help. I was covering the story of an Afghan man who is a U.S. citizen. He was an interpreter, and he had already come here. He actually flew himself into Kabul to make the State Department get his parents out, and they were stuck in Qatar for an extra long time. This was in the summer, I want to say the summer after the withdrawal. And the reason they were stuck is because of all of the P3 reunification cases, all the families that were coming to be with the unaccompanied minors. And so that could have been her family if they just would have not.
Yeah.
And of course this was massively frustrating to this family that's like, wait, we were here. Why is everyone moving through? But, there are so many different things going on simultaneously at this moment, right?
Yeah.
So she then, let's pick up with, she wasn't designated a UAM, and she got then put into...
She was put into the not general population, but adult, the adult facilities where they hold incoming refugees in Virginia, on the military base in Virginia. I don't know all the right words probably, but...
it doesn't matter.
So she was put in with the adult population there. And was alone, and also was not together with the other young people, the other minors that she had gotten to know really well in Qatar. So she was there for about 2 months, and that was very hard for her. That was a difficult time. And she then was sent, again, as a single adult, to here to Oregon, where she was connected to one of the refugee resettlement organizations here. And at that point, they were not aware that she wasn't actually an adult. And so she was housed in a hotel room until they could get her housing. And it was during that time that she finally was able to express to someone her actual age. But that was also a very, very scary time for her, being alone in a suburban hotel room with no English. She was terrified. She said men came knocking at her door and asking to be let in, and she was terrified to leave the room. She spent those couple of months crying, and it was very hard for her.
I am sure, and not none traumatic. Of the normal things that a child. That's just And there's no. Wow, I mean, I feel like she is owed something for having been put through that at some level, whether it be therapy or, like some kind of, like, we really put you through a lot and we would like to offer you counseling services or some kind of thing. Has there been any?
Yes. Well, fortunately, once she was brought into the foster care system, into Child Protective Services, that changed a lot for her. So actually, let me back up. So once the refugee organization here, the resettlement organization that had received her, found out that she was actually only 15 and barely 15 at that, they located a host family for her while they tried to figure out what to do with her, because they were not equipped to handle unaccompanied minors. They handled adults and families. Mm-hmm. And so they found a host family, which is how she ended up at the school where I used to teach, where the social worker knew me. So she was living with this host family for about 5 months, but they weren't receiving any of the services that we receive, or the financial resources that we receive as foster parents through the state of Oregon. And Cara wasn't receiving the benefits and services that foster children do. And so it was unsuccessful. It was really too much to ask of a family with several other children who really weren't aware of the level of her trauma and her needs. And they just weren't able to handle it.
Sure.
So then they kind of gave her back to the refugee organization, and someone associated with the refugee organization essentially just took her home, and she stopped attending school, stopped attending soccer practice, and was really crushed and afraid. So that's when she was referred to the state of Oregon, to Department of Human Services, to be brought into protective custody. And that was at the same time that we learned about her and said, sure, she can come stay with us. And so it wasn't long before we learned that she was going to be placed in foster care and placed with a family in foster.
How do you think that would have gone had that happened?
She could have been lucky and been placed with a foster family that had the resources and the knowledge to care for her. But I think it's not likely that she would have been. It's very hard to find good foster families. It's quite a commitment. That's possible. I think it's more likely that she would have been put in another unstable housing situation and would have become further traumatized than she already was. So my husband and I talked about it for about 15 minutes and said, of course we're going to become her foster family.
Oh my
How could we really
goodness.
do anything else?
So how much did you have to go through to get there? Like what
Well,
kind of...
the emergency certification was pretty quick. They just
Okay.
did a quick background check, and we had to fill out an application. But then once that was completed through the courts, that still had to be approved through the courts, then we still had to go through the full certification process within 6 months of her being with us. And it's a lot. I can see why it's hard to find foster families. So it involved very extensive and intrusive interviews, both of us, my husband and myself, but also our adult children and other friends and family of ours.
Sure.
About, I don't remember how many hours of training, at least 10 hours of training, and a lot of paperwork. But it was worth it, so she didn't have to be thrown around yet again. So it's back to your question that started this line of conversation. Since she is a child in foster care, she does receive therapy. And not only that, I have to give a little shout out to Oregon DHS, because they do have a regular therapy company or business that they utilize normally, but they didn't have anyone there who spoke Kara's language, and at that point her English was still extremely limited. So really anything that was important or difficult to talk about, we needed an interpreter, which was also provided by the state of Oregon. But so they allowed me to find a different therapist for her that is out of the network that they normally use, and they still pay for it. So I was able to, it took a lot of time and work, but I was able to find her an amazing therapist who is Persian, so she speaks her language, she understands the immigrant experience, and her specialties are adolescents and refugees.
Wow.
So it couldn't have been more perfect, and I was really relieved that that the state said they would pay for it.
Yeah, that's really incredible. I'm wondering though, the amount of training and the intrusive questions and all those things that you went through, comparatively, how much time did you have to devote to understanding Afghanistan and Kara's experience and what her family was going through, and that whole, because it is not easy to understand Afghanistan and all of that. So tell me about that learning curve that got thrown at you.
Yes, we are so very intimately informed about Afghanistan and the history and the culture and what's happening now in Afghanistan because of that. Some of it I intentionally educated myself when she was first with us and did a lot of reading and research. But really, more than that is what we've learned from her, from the few Afghan friends that she already had here in Oregon who have also become friends of ours, and through her family because they do video calls every day, actually twice a day, every morning and every evening. So they have become sort of a constant presence in our home, and they've become like extended family to us. Her youngest brother refers to me as his other mother.
Oh my goodness. And this is the question I want to ask because when I read the article about your family's experience, they mentioned that you were an adoptee. And I've never talked about it on the podcast before because it's never been relevant on the podcast, but I'm also adopted and I have several sets of birth parents. It's a very fun and exciting but you have it's an incredible thing. And the reason that it's important here is I think that the term foster parent was difficult for Cara to understand, right? At the first thing. And she kind of like pushed back against it. And your particular experience helped her, I think, so talk about how you framed that and why that was important and, the early days of that and how it's evolved now, because obviously people are calling you mom now
Yeah.
and like it's just, but it doesn't get there overnight. That's not a,
No.
whoop, okay, cool thing.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, I was able to explain to her that I have two mothers and two fathers, that I have two families. She did understand the term adopted. Well, when used with the interpreter and translators. And so I was able to explain that to her. And I also was able to explain to her that while we were not adopting her, which, by the way, we would have been happy to do, but then that would have rendered the process, the P3 process.
Sure. Yeah.
But I was able to explain to her that I have two mothers and that one mother wasn't more important than the other, and that they worked together to keep me safe and to help me grow and become the person that I am, and that I love them both equally. And I told her, I don't remember exactly how I told her, but I tried to let her know that I wanted it to be that way with her family, and I wanted her family to understand that we were not trying to somehow take her away from them, or that they were any less her parents than they ever were. And I think that was almost more for their benefit than it was for hers, so that she could explain that to them and they could relax a little bit. They were traumatized too, of course, and very, very worried about her all the time. And so it allowed them to at least let go of that one worry that she was okay.
Oh yeah. I can't imagine the worry of, every day not knowing your daughter is in a hotel, strange men are bothering, or like that.
Yeah.
In a strange country with different customs, different. Whew, that's a huge. That's a really beautiful thing to be able to convey, and it is, every day the responsibility of choosing the things like that can't be done from overseas. Somebody
Right.
has to who understands that system, the school system, all those things that are good for her that she needs every day. It's. Yeah.
And those times, when she's been sick or she's been in the hospital a few times due to her trauma, and just, her mother knowing that that she wasn't alone, and that there was another mother there.
Someone who loves her.
Helped a lot. Someone who loves her.
Not someone who's just like, oh, I'm, you can stay here for a while until you're, that's really incredible. I want to talk about that P3 program. So that started, I'm trying to do the mental math. It started when she was with you. Is that accurate, or had it started before?
Well, it started before in one way, because her immigration attorney had been trying to get her family's case started, despite the fact that she didn't have the UAM designation. So she had been trying. She had been in communication pretty extensively with CARE and with the State Department, but it was unclear whether there was an actual case happening. And I think there wasn't, because it wasn't until after we submitted the DS 4317 in September of 22 that they did start to get communications asking about documents and interviews and so on and so forth. So that did get the ball rolling. We honestly were feeling fairly optimistic that maybe they were going to be here by the end of last year. And then when that didn't happen, maybe by the time she graduates this June. But then when the executive orders came down, we just were crushed.
Oh my goodness. And now here I was getting so fuming when you were talking about the lack of response. I can't tell you how many P1 and P2. Nobody with P3 has ever contacted me, right? Because I think P3 is like this double secret. I know people who are helping P3 candidates, but there's not this large vocal contingent like there are with P1 and P2. P1 and P2, man, like if anything happens to those programs, I get like 100 emails from angry P1 and P2 people who are they band together, they lobby together. I can get the numbers of P1 and P2 candidates.
Yeah.
I can't get anything about P3. It really makes me angry. And P1 and P2 have their own issues. People who haven't gotten an ARR number in years, right? And I don't know if it's an ARR number that they give to, is that with P3 too? It's so mystifying. I know people who are working on it and they are like, we have no idea. We're just waiting, and then maybe one day it pops and somebody comes, and how destabilizing, and luckily I'm so glad that Cara has you, because I've heard about my good friend John Moses always tells a story about a man and his son who are in his region, and they're just bereft. They're watching all these families around them doing family things, and they are missing a part of themselves that they don't know when it will be here, and they keep asking. He said one guy just keeps sending emails every day to state please. It's almost inhuman, and I know that they're trying, but the caseloads are huge and there's no answer. So you had no indication this entire time of timelines. Have they been interviewed by IOM does the interviews, right?
Yeah, they have been interviewed. They all of their documentation has been sent in. We got as far as the request for information about what do they call them? The significant person in the U.S., I think is what it's called, to help with deciding which part of the U.S. They would have been coming to. So and based on the experiences of some other people that Cara knows who were in similar situations that she was, we sort of were able to follow more or less the timelines that their families had experienced, and that's why I say we had reason to believe that maybe they would get here by the end of last year, just following what had happened with others. It was particularly crushing for her. In November of last year was when the last of her cohort of friends from Qatar who had been separated from their families. The last of them besides her was reunited with their family in November. His family arrived right around the election, and that was crushing for her because she's the only one. We tried to remind her that there are still, sadly, many unaccompanied minors still waiting for their families in the U.S., but all she saw really was that she was the only one left, and she really began to lose hope.
Gosh, that must have been so hard to see.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you do when you can see that hope getting lost in her?
We remind her that she's not alone. We remind her that we are her family here. We remind her that life is long, and that although we can't tell her, yes, they'll be here this year, yes, they'll be here in 4 years with a new administration, we can tell her that things always change and she will see them again. But at those times, we know to expect that she will talk about the fact that she hasn't hugged her mother in 3.5 years, that she just wants to hug her mother. We know she's going to cry. We know she just needs love.
Yeah. That's very tough. You're doing all the right things, I think. But that's a lot for everybody, because that pain then radiates onto you. And there is one good story in here. And so I want to talk about that really briefly. And yet it's also fraught with uncertainty, because what's not fraught with uncertainty right now?
Exactly.
So you applied for humanitarian parole for one of Kara's siblings. She probably had multiple siblings, or is this the only sibling?
No, that she has, besides this sibling, she has 8 other siblings. So
but this was the one that would not have 8, right? That you explain it, because you are so much more into this than me.
Sure, yeah. So, yes, through the CARE program for Afghan family reunification, the eligible family members are siblings, well, for an unaccompanied minor, siblings under the age of 21, siblings who were under the age of 21 at the time of the evacuations, and who are single. And then their parents. So parents and unmarried siblings who at the time of the evacuation were under the age of 21. Due to her date of birth not being accurate on her Tazkara, her oldest sister, who had just graduated from high school, she was the only one who had graduated from high school when the Taliban took over. Her oldest sister on paper was over 21 at the time of the evacuations. And so we knew, although we had requested an exception, we knew that it was unlikely that she would be able to be relocated with the rest of the family. And she would have been left alone as a single young woman in Afghanistan. And we said, we are not going to wait. We're not going to wait for that to happen. We need to find a way to bring her to safety now. And we did. So
you did it through humanitarian parole, which is like notoriously the worst pipeline, right? Most people don't get it. I'm astonished that you were able to procure it for Kara's sister. Was there a reason, do you think, that she was able to receive it?
At the risk of sounding self-congratulatory, I think it's because I worked my ass off for 9 months. It was like a second job for me, but it was a labor of love. But yes, there was also because their family has experienced a lot of both threats and violence under the Taliban.
Okay.
And so that she very much was a good candidate for humanitarian parole. She ticked all the boxes. And yes, and I worked very, very hard. I mined all the contacts I've acquired in my 50 plus years of life, and it was actually, despite how difficult it was, how infuriating, sometimes crushing, and expensive. Despite all of that, it also was a very positive experience because through that process, we were able to see the good in humanity. People that had never met her or met me, friends of friends of friends, and total strangers stepped up to help her along the way, whether it be through funds. We started a GoFundMe to help with that process, with the idea being then when the rest of the family got here, whatever was left over would be for them to get started. So a lot of people contributed to that, but also as big or maybe even bigger than the funding resources, there were people in all the countries that she was in during her journey hosting her, except for one. There was only one country that I wasn't able to find a host for her, but people who didn't know any of us stepped up and welcomed her into their homes, based on a couple of phone calls, and it was a beautiful thing. There were just people all along the way that stepped up and helped, and it really restored my faith in humanity.
That's so incredible. What a beautiful thing. And now she's here.
Now she's here,
And
which has
she's
made a big, big, big difference for both Cara and for us. So when you were asking about when these things happen and the weight of the uncertainty is on her shoulders, it has made a big difference having her sister here. We feel like we have another partner in keeping her well.
That's so amazing. And how is her sister adjusting? Because it's, totally different experience for her.
Very different experience. On one hand, it was more difficult for her because, when Cara came to us, she'd already been in the U.S. for 7 months. No, more than that even. About 7 months. And had begun the process of transition. Whereas when her sister came to us, she hadn't had that experience yet. And she had the experience of going through several different culture shocks as we moved her around the world waiting on the humanitarian parole. But the biggest difference was she had come by choice. She had chosen to leave her country and come join her sister. Whereas Cara had no idea when she approached the U.S. Soldiers and got on that plane that she was going to be separated from her family for 3.5 years, or maybe 10 years. We just don't know. So I think that was a big difference. Also, she's older. She's older than Cara is. She had more education already. Cara lost a whole year of education in that process, and she was younger. Mm-hmm. So it's in some ways it's been easier for her, in other ways it's been more difficult. But she's doing well. She's learning English. She's working.
That's amazing. Yeah. But humanitarian parole now comes with its own uncertainty, and that's the other wrinkle in this whole thing. So how are you attempting to get her? What is the, for Cara, she has asylum. She has
She already has asylum, and very soon she will be eligible to apply for her green card.
Oh, okay.
She very much wants to become a U.S. citizen.
Mm-hmm.
She loves the United States. Their whole family loves the United States, and so that's her goal.
Sure. But her sister has parole, which now is a concerning thing because we're watching You for You get stripped away from Ukrainians who, and it's, to me, that's so weird because I used to rail against You for You because I would watch all of the Ukrainians getting to flee and just go through this super quick pipeline at the border while Afghans are just like, what about us? And then, but now it's going to be gone. And I feel bad about every time I ever got angry about You for You because that wasn't what I wanted either.
That same series of thoughts and feelings that you just described, I've had that exact same thing.
It's like, no, but that's not what I meant. I was only angry because I wanted the same thing for Afghans. I didn't want the same thing for both of them to be that you can't be safely here anymore. So, I mean, are you telling Kara's sister to carry her items with her? So we got her the red card and in Farsi, and we're having her carry her documents with her. We're really hoping that that Afghanistan isn't added to that list. She had already submitted her asylum application even before the inauguration. So if any old rules of law and norms hold, she should be protected from removal by the nature of her asylum application already being submitted. But as we know, very few prior norms, rules, and laws are being respected. Does that mean she's had her master calendar hearing and all of that, or
no.
Like for a year? So I never want to bring up sad things, but I just told a story for Reason magazine a few weeks ago about an Afghan who had already had his master calendar hearing and went in for his yearly checkup with ICE, and they detained him, and there was nothing wrong. I mean, he was an intel person who worked very closely with our intel people, was trained by them. And now, as far as I know, he's still in the ICE facility, and he did nothing.
I saw that article, and that was a big panic moment.
And I hate that. Nobody wants to be the panic person, but it's like you have to be prepared. It's terrifying, and I never want to see someone who we gave aid to being deported to Panama in a hotel. And no one understands why, how, what. That's just, it's cruel and unusual. And so I'm going to pray that that's not, and I'm also like you, I believe more in like the universe making things happen at like times and like putting you in places, which I think we talked about before we started recording. So anybody who's listening who's like, well, what are you talking about? Like the universe. I believe that I do believe in a higher power, but I think the universe also tells you where you are and where you're supposed to be. And I think maybe you can tell the listeners now how you feel about how kind of you ended up here and how that all played out in your mind.
Sure. I just remember when Kara first came to us, and this probably was part of the fact that it only took us 15 minutes to make the decision to become her foster family. But I remember thinking that she and I must have been put in each other's paths by some higher power, God or the universe or something, because I feel like we were uniquely prepared and qualified to take care of her. She goes to the school where I used to teach before I stopped teaching. I know all the people there. I know the educational system. I know the district. I understand language acquisition. I have a lot of experience with people learning languages. I have a lot of experience, both my husband and I have a lot of experience having people in our home who speak limited or even no English and who are from different cultural backgrounds. We have the space, we have the room, we have the time. I have a very flexible job in terms of being able to schedule appointments for her, which I would not have been able to do if I were still a classroom teacher. It would have been impossible to foster her if I were still a classroom teacher.
Wow.
So it just felt like we were put in each other's paths for a reason. Oh, and the other thing, I don't think I mentioned it before, between undergraduate school and becoming a teacher, my original plan was to be a lawyer for refugees, a refugee and immigration attorney. And so I had done a lot of volunteering with refugee organizations, and then when I decided to become a teacher instead, my original plan was to teach English as a second language, and that changed along the way. But it really felt like things had just really come full circle, and here she was in our home, and we made such a deep connection with each other. She was the daughter that I had always wanted and had never had, and here she is. So I had two boys.
Amazing. How do your boys feel about all of this?
Oh, they're great. They're great. So one of them lives about 5 hours away, so he doesn't see her in person very often. But he and his fiance have just really welcomed her with open arms. The one who lives closer to us tends to be more introverted and more cautious, and he was a little uncertain at the beginning, but it didn't take him long to step into the role of big brother for the first time in his life, because he was always the baby. So he helps her with things like computer and phone and chemistry homework, and yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I would love to ask you two kind of concluding questions. And the first one is, if you were able to talk to anybody in the administration right now, what would you want them to know about Kara's family and about your foster daughter?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's a good question. I want them to know that although she loves it here, and she wants to be here, she wants to become a U.S. citizen and serve the United States. She even for a while said she wanted to be a soldier or be in the CIA. She's changed her mind on that one, though. Even though all of those things are true, it was our government who lifted her out of her country and away from her family and separated her. And we owe it to her to give her her family back. I also would want them to know that her family has suffered so much, mostly due to the fact that her father worked for the previous Afghan government. So as far as the Taliban are concerned, he's a traitor. But because he worked for the Afghan government and not the U.S. government, he did not qualify for an SIV. So he and his family have been very targeted. He and two of her brothers have been assaulted. Their house has been searched multiple times. They have been living in constant fear for 3.5 years. And the fact that they have a young daughter living in the United States has only added to that, because the Taliban is aware of that as well. They are not safe. They love the United States. They trusted the United States, and we have betrayed their trust. Not just them, but so many other Afghans. And although I recognize that humanitarian concerns seem to not be a priority of the current administration. I do like to believe that national security is a priority, and a lot of Afghans have lost their confidence in the United States. That's not a good situation for us to be in. That's what I want them to know.
Yep. I absolutely understand that, and I'm heartened to see this week that actually there are Republican lawmakers speaking out, because and they were all for the last 3.5 years. That's what I heard from, were a lot of Republicans, and then they went like, hey, wait, don't you remember? We used to talk.
Doesn't this still matter to you? Yeah.
Right. And I'm glad to see that they're using their voices now.
Me too.
And I hope it's not too late, because, and you know, I recently learned about something too that I don't know if it's something that could be pursued, but like it's what was it called? Something about asylees. It's like P3, but for asylees. And, you know, you have I'll have to figure out the specifics, and say I had never heard of it before, but maybe there will be things. Honestly, I know the people in this community, and I know you know them too. None of them are going to quit. Not a single one. There will be ways found to make people safe to do, but it makes sense for us to not stop. And I see that, you know, President Trump was very vocal about capturing the man who planned Abbey Gate. That doesn't end anything. It might put a neat little pin in the fact that now you understand who planned that one attack, but it doesn't get rid of the Taliban running the country. The Taliban letting Al-Qaeda be in that country, and ISIS-K growing in that country, and threats to the U.S. being in that country. Yeah. So, you know, you can pretend like it's done. Nothing is done, and the people that we made promises to are still in harm's way and very upset.
And we need those people to not lose faith. And yes.
That's the hardest part, is trying to, because I know Afghans are terrified right now. In fact, I always read a letter from an Afghan at the end of an episode if I have one, and I'm going to read one after I ask you this final question, which is slightly more hopeful. But, you know, what are your expectations and hopes for the future, as the situation is obviously changing, and one day it might be one way and one way the next day, but what are your hopes and expectations there?
I hope, and I do believe, that someday her family will get here. I really hope that they can get here before her high school graduation in a few months. It would just be amazing for them to be able to be here with her for that, and for us to be able to help them in their new phase of life, in their new home. I don't have a lot of confidence that it will happen that soon, but I do believe that they will be reunited one way or another, even if it has to wait until she's a citizen, and can bring them that way. But hearing about the P3 for asylees is very heartening to me. I'll be looking that up right after we're on.
I forget what it's called, FMA or FJ, the Family Reunification Asylee something, F something A dash a number. I know it's that, and I'll have to look it up too. And if I find it first, one of us will find it before the other. But when I heard about it, I was like, oh wait, that's a thing. That's a thing that's not U.S. rap. Like,
that would be amazing. But yes, and then the other part of my hopes and expectations is that Kara can grow into the woman that she is destined to be, which I believe she can and will, because she's here in the United States, where all the doors are open to her, and she has all the support that she needs.
So much love. And something I always try to remember too is that, you know, I wouldn't be the person I am without having gone through a lot of heinous things, just horrible things that I would never wish on anyone else, but they turned me into who I am. And the strongest people sometimes have to be made that way, and if that is any consolation, she will likely be a very strong woman.
She
The world
already
needs
is.
the world needs strong women, especially
Yes.
because the Taliban have no regard. We're filming this on International Women's Day, and I had this
I'm
thought, right? I had this thought right before we started recording. I was like, they can't make life. That's something that only women can do. All they
yeah.
can do is take life away. That is not a superpower. And
Yeah.
even women who don't create life, they nurture it. They
Yeah.
make sure it continues growing. All they do is cut it down. Like, how weak, how sad to
Yes.
be that. So I think it's really great that we're telling this story on that day. And
Me too. I was excited about that.
forget the Taliban. We need these strong women who can rebuild everything that they've broken down. But I did promise I am going to tell this story. I'm pulling it up, and I'm not going to name the person who sent it to me because I do not believe they want me to do that, and I wouldn't do it anyway because I don't think that's smart to do these days. But it says, I hope the U.S. government knows that we helped them. Without the help of Afghan people, they can't do that. And they sent some videos of the work that they did. That's what they meant, that their job, that they couldn't have done the things that they did without. Especially without help of the Afghan people we know who worked honestly. Now they forget all this. I don't care if I can come to the USA or not, or if they give us a visa or not. But we have one great message from this. In the future, we need to be careful about our work and help, especially with the U.S. government. I love the USA people, especially volunteers like, he names one of my best volunteer friends, you and others. I will always respect. This is my message. If you can deliver it to the government, thank you so much. This is the closest I'll be able to get to delivering that to the government, but I think it's important for everyone to hear. This is somebody who has sent more information to volunteers about what's still happening there than anyone I know. And it just, I've never heard that tone in their voice, and it's so heart-wrenching. I received an email today from a young man who's been helping. I had him on this podcast, actually. He's been helping his dad get his SIV. His dad doesn't know this. And his dad would be irate if he did know. But he's been trying to find out where his dad's SIV is in process and get with anyone who can help him to process it faster. And he ages out in 2 weeks.
Oh.
And he asked me if I could send another congressional inquiry, so of course I did.
Yeah.
But, 2 weeks. Also, the CSPA shouldn't be a problem. He shouldn't really age out. But the bigger problem is that in 1 week, if there's a ban and there's no carve out for SIV, it doesn't matter. Yeah. And the other thing is that we've basically run out of SIVs. If Congress doesn't allocate more SIVs, I think we've given out more COM approvals than we have SIVs left. So we're in the chances of that happening are this big, and this is a young man who's so smart, so poised to go places, but not under the Taliban.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of hope inside of Afghanistan, and the Taliban are squelching it. And I've really taken this for a downturn. Is there anything hopeful you want to add, Julie? Because I've done a poor job of trying to bring anything positive to the end.
Yes, I am always astounded and impressed and inspired by the hope and the tenacity and the strength of Afghan women. Kara's family and all the other Afghan women I've had the pleasure of being acquainted with during the last few years, and the ones that I follow on social media. I believe they are going to lead the way, and I believe once there is a new government in Afghanistan, they are going to create something beautiful and strong and lasting.
I totally agree with that too. In fact, I just put a little story out on my podcast page about that. I mean, Afghan women have given me hope when I didn't have any, when I was going through a divorce that hit me out of nowhere and didn't have any hope to go forward. And these women are living under the Taliban, and they're still fighting, even if it's hard, even if they're telling me how hard it is. They're still fighting every day. And that's incredible. And they're still going to school, and they're still teaching other people, and they're still doing all these things that are not allowed, because they're not going to let the Taliban stop them. And like, how can you quit when those women don't quit? So
Exactly.
I love Afghan women. They are the bravest people out there. Well, Julie, thank you so much for sharing this story. It's really amazing what you and your husband have done. You've changed lives, and not many people get the opportunity to do that. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I want to remind all Afghan listeners, we always want to tell your stories. It doesn't matter where you're living. It doesn't matter what part of your story you want to tell. Please send your letters to the Afghanistan Project Podcast at gmail.com. And I want to thank all our listeners, as always, for sharing your time, for supporting the people of Afghanistan, and Tashakor, and hope to see you again soon.
Tashakor.